Necropolis League is in its final month and steadily drawing to a close. At the same time, hype season for the next league is gonna start spooling up over the next couple of weeks, so I think now is the perfect time to give a postmortem on Necropolis League, a league that existed. Hi, it's Lerald, and I'm going to talk about that thing I just said, but first, if you like this video and want to see more about Path of Exile, please like and subscribe. It helps our channel grow and makes it more sustainable for us to make videos like this one, and videos about all of the various mechanics that exist in this enormous, excellent game. Alright, quick side note. I spent most of the weekend playing the Elden Ring DLC, which is fantastic, 10 out of 10. I took a few hours out of the weekend to write up the script for this video, felt pretty good about that, being an adult man, responsible, and so on, and then immediately after I finished it, I opened up YouTube to look at some Remembrance weapon comparisons and saw Mathel had just posted a video of his recap of the league. Now that's fine, I like Mathel, everyone likes Mathel, he seems like a cool dude. I haven't watched his video, I don't want to copy it, but I can guess at his conclusion, which is that the league was not great, but the game is still good, and you can play it if you like it, which he does. I do too, and I just want to preface that even though I'm going to say some things in this video that could be taken in a negative light if you read it uncharitably, I still think the game is in great shape as well. There's always room for improvement, nothing is perfect, but it is a good, fun game to me. Okay, let's get started by talking about what happened with Necropolis League, one of the leagues of all time, and the conditions that led to player retention really falling off. Okay, first off, we're going to be using PoEDB's concurrent players charts, which are based on data taken from SteamDB, and an assumption that PoE has a roughly 60-40 split of players playing through Steam versus the standalone client. This is data that GGG has backed up in the past somewhat. It is not absolute undeniable truth, it is just sort of a vague idea that gives us a decent understanding of the size and scope of a league's player base, generally speaking. And generally speaking, Necropolis League launch was big, real big. This was the second largest league launch of all time according to the chart. Second only after Crucible League, which launched, I think 51 weeks earlier, so almost but not quite exactly 1 year. I think this is important because if we use that chart and we look back across a couple of years worth of leagues, we see a similar pattern. There are some weak leagues. Calandra and Arch Nemesis really stand out in my memory and on the chart as leagues that players didn't enjoy, but by and large, the leagues that start in spring and continue into summer perform poorly. They have a big launch, followed by a significant decline. And Necropolis League followed that pattern exactly. It had a huge launch, followed by a steady, severe decline. It is, at least by this metric, the all-time leader in player retention drop-off. I think there are a lot of factors responsible here, and to some extent, decline is inevitable. Time's arrow marches ever forward, death draws closer with each passing day, and more importantly, the school year comes to a conclusion during those spring months, about a month or two into the league. Students have to spend less time playing PoE so they can focus on finals or whatever. I wake up each and every day thankful that I never have to go back to school, and hopefully you can too someday. But, once school is done, people then go on summer vacations as well. Lame time, game time turns into sun time, fun time. I guess that's not true for Australians and New Zealanders apparently. I just googled it and they go on vacation during December, which seems dangerous to me given that all their gravity harnesses would be frozen, but I guess that's just how they do it. I'm not gonna judge. All of this very real factual information about time in Australia is only one component of the league's decline, and so now I want to look at the league mechanic itself, which I think is the real culprit for the fall off. Necropolis League was extremely ambitious. It is a massive league mechanic. So let's start with what I consider to be the most successful part, the Lantern of Aramor and Embers of the Allflame. The Lantern of Aramor applies a bunch of modifiers to monsters in each campaign zone and map area. It doesn't affect places like Delve, Heist, and the Lab, and so on, but it's basically active everywhere else. This was immediately criticized during the initial League unveiling. Always on League mechanics that greatly increase monster difficulty are, understandably, not super popular. The idea is that you can swap the bonus modifiers around from monster type to monster type and kind of customize the difficulty of each area, which is cool, and it allowed players to gain tons of never-before-seen information about monster packs, their density, their ability types, and whether they spawn with a pack leader, and so on. All of this was kind of neat. This is also offset in typical GGG fashion by the monsters having two types of modifiers, Haunted and Devoted modifiers. Haunted modifiers bad, Devoted modifiers good. With a properly set up map and a good bit of luck, you could apply a Devoted modifier that would make monsters drop Chaos Orbs onto a very dense pack of monsters and walk out of a random tier 16 map with like 200 Chaos Orbs. It happened to me, it could happen to anyone. The big problem here is that this created a delay at the start of every single map. You don't just blast through maps in Necropolis League, you open up a map, consider the monster mods, shift the rewards around, and only once you've finished your homework are you then allowed to start blasting. For a lot of players, as soon as they've gotten their gear kind of online, their characters online, they would just move the Devoted modifiers around and ignore all the Haunted modifiers, and then occasionally die randomly and be frustrated. Embers of the All-Flame are itemized drops throughout the league that allow you to replace a pack of monsters with a predetermined set of monsters. I really like them. You can use them in conjunction with Devoted modifiers to substantially multiply the number of rewards from the Lantern modifiers. This is multiplied even further by strongboxes, since unlike most League mechanics, Ambush spawns monsters that are part of the map's monster table instead of League-specific monsters. All Flame Embers also added in lots of old League mechanics and their rewards, and some rewards that aren't in the core drop pool like tattoos from Ancestor League. They are pretty good. There was some abuse of the interaction between Embers, Strongboxes, and Scarabs early on in the league to spawn literally hundreds of Rogue Exiles in each map, and that led to them spawning thousands of Uniques and hundreds of Scarabs in each map. Nemesis 3 never spawned so much crap to pick up. This was patched out after just a couple of days, but it was part of a pattern of behavior and response over the first few weeks of the league. Some member of the player base would discover something completely broken, usually Fub Gun, share it with the community, more players would rush to farm it, GGG would nerf it, repeat, repeat, repeat. This frustrated a lot of dedicated players, fun police memes abounded on the pathofexile subreddit, and that all really makes a lot of sense. Even if nerfing a strategy that spawns hundreds if not thousands of uniques per map is the right thing to do for the health of the game, it is going to annoy the people using it. And those were the people who cared the most about the game at that moment in the league cycle. It's kind of a perfect recipe for player dissatisfaction. And speaking of dissatisfaction, let's talk about corpses. Necropolis League didn't just have the Lantern and Embers, even though that would have probably been enough. No, they went really big with this league, and they added in one of the strongest, most complicated crafting mechanics that Path of Exile has ever had. Monsters and maps have a chance to leave a corpse behind when they die. You can take this corpse to the Necropolis and plant it in the massive interconnected plot of graves. The corpses allow you to control stat weights, mod tiers, and a whole bunch of other stuff that basically results in being able to craft 6 tier 1 mod items pretty easily. There's a lot of other crazy stuff that's possible as well. Multiple fractured mods, fractured influenced items, really just some great stuff. On the one hand, the grave crafting is unbearably tedious. It takes a substantial amount of time to craft just a single item, but on the other hand, you can craft multiple 1500 elemental DPS spine bows at the same time. We're talking about items that would have been like Premier Abyss in previous leagues, made available in week 2 of Necropolis League for literally 10 divines. I sold more than one 1500 elemental DPS spine bow for 10 divines. This had the unfortunate but predictable effect of making gear really good really fast. Players hit the point where they felt that they had maxed out their characters way quicker than normal. It was also not a crafting system with a substantial amount of depth. Even though it had a lot of complexity, it wasn't like Harvest where you could do more stuff with an item. This is a one-shot crafting mechanic. You make the item with Necropolis, that is it. It now exists. You can craft it further if you want, but you will be doing so with normal crafting mechanics. Necropolis League does not interact with existing items at all. It only exists to print new items. But wait, there's more. The corpse system is extremely tedious. There are hundreds of different modifiers available on corpses. There's increased chance of a type of mod, reduced chance of a type of mod. Multiply that across all of PoE's hundreds or thousands of possible modifiers and add in a ton more meta crafting options just for good measure, and you're gonna have to store a lot of corpses at once if you want to make consistently good crafts. So how many corpses can you store at once? 64. The Necropolis has 88 separate graves, so you cannot even store one full craft's worth of corpses at once. And since there are so many different types of corpses available, you're probably going to want to store a lot of extra corpses just in case you want to work toward more than one crafting project. To help with that, you can itemize your corpses and store them in your stash. This sounds okay, except that the coffins you use to itemize corpses occupy 2 inventory slots each and do not stack. So these things absolutely devour your stash tabs. I've bought so many stash tabs during this league. Even so, I could not keep up with the number of corpses in my stash. It is overflowing with death. Alright, now let's move on to the next problem. Corpses. That's right, there's even more bad stuff to say about corpses. Corpses appear when infected monsters die. They cannot be hidden from your loot filter. They always appear. Their UI blocks interacting with items and objects in your maps that are behind that corpse interface. The amount of deaths I've had throughout this league due to trying to click an orb that dropped and was behind a corpse interface and I trying to dance around it for a while and then I get one shot by some random dude has been entirely too high. Even just the amount of time wasted when there are no monsters around because I'm playing it safe from previous experiences of getting killed. I've just wasted probably an hour of my life getting around the corpse UI throughout this league. It's annoying. Now let's talk about the Atlas passive tree. The endgame received a substantial rework in patch 3.24, and I think the core idea was good. PoE's endgame was pretty established and a little stale. I think we were due for a shakeup. At the same time, GGG decided to experiment with putting the League mechanic on the Atlas passive tree, and they did so by putting Necropolis passives on all 4 corners of the passive tree, with Lantern and All Flame passives in the top and bottom left, and Corpse passives in the top and bottom right. So if you wanted to take all 4 passive wheels to truly maximize the value of the League mechanic, that would cost 24 passive points or so without any travel nodes. And you're going to have to spend travel nodes to get there too. As the League evolved and people really began to hate corpses, the right side wheels became pretty unpopular and they were mostly phased out, but the Lantern and Ember passives were still used in the majority of setups. This basically translated to minus 12 to 20 Atlas passive points in order to properly engage with the League mechanic. This feels like taking away something you're used to having and then letting you pay to buy it back. I call that the Blizzard special. It was an experiment and I am all for experimentation. Trying things out is cool, but the results speak for themselves and they say this sucks. Now I don't want to just skip over all the positives of the passive tree rework. They were mostly pretty good. GGG made it so that you can guarantee League mechanics will spawn just through the use of Atlas passives. This is a great change. It is fantastic for solo self-found players, it was great at the League start, and it's been good just throughout the entire League. It's just a really, really smart change. GGG also added a new Atlas passive keystone named Back to Basics, which blocks all extra content, so we're talking League mechanics and influence types, but grants more map modifier effect by a random amount between 0 and 80%. I really like Back to Basics map farming. I think it's been my favorite part of the League. It's simple, it grants huge amounts of increased item quantity and pack size, and it really makes you reevaluate the impact of a lot of map modifiers. Taking regular map modifiers and potentially doubling or tripling their value, since this is a more modifier that acts as a multiplier on top of all of the increased map mod effect that you can get throughout the Atlas passive tree. This really transforms a lot of modifiers that you would never really notice into seriously dangerous mechanics. I like that, and the simplicity and increased reward has been a real fun change of pace from just grinding a single League mechanic over and over. GGG also added 3 swappable passive trees. This is great for being able to switch back and forth between strategies without having to spend tons and tons of orbs of unmaking to unspec out and spec back in and unspec out and spec back in. I have no complaints about this system. It would be like complaining about ice cream. I'm not going to be doing that. GGG wasn't done with just reworking the passive tree. They also introduced a new type of endgame, Tier 17 maps. These are supposed to function as content that exists between Tier 16 maps and normal Pinnacle bosses and Uber bosses. And in that capacity, they are a complete failure. Tier 17 maps are substantially more difficult than Uber bosses by a considerable margin. There are several kind of interconnected factors going on here, so let's just kind of run through them. First off, Uber boss keys were decoupled from standard Pinnacle boss keys and turned into boss fragments that drop from tier 17 bosses. You need 5 of those fragments to open up the portals to an Uber boss. This is an okay idea, but kind of annoying because farming those fragments can be slightly RNG. They are weighted to specific maps of tier 17 maps, but they're not guaranteed to come from them. For our purposes, it's mostly problematic just because the tier 17s are themselves more difficult than the content that they unlock, and you need to do potentially 5 or so of them each to reach those Uber bosses. This creates a very strange sense of progression. You overcome a series of difficult obstacles, doing 5 or 10 tier 17 bosses, and then the content that follows, the culmination of all that effort, is easier and a disappointment by comparison. Now, there's another small nerf that occurred to difficulty as well that doesn't apply to all of the bosses, but for Eater and Exarch, turning the Uber boss invitations into fragments means that they no longer have that potential to roll additional mods by rolling your Eater and Exarch invitations. This makes them substantially less challenging than they were in previous leagues. Second, tier 17 maps feature tier 17 mods. Tier 17 mods are build disabling in the same way that being annihilated in thermonuclear Armageddon might burn your skin a little bit. At the start of the league, tier 17 maps could not be modified in any way when they dropped. They would drop, your build probably couldn't do the map, and so you just sold it for cheap to one of the handful of players whose build could handle the combination of death traps, insta-kill monsters, and no regen, no auras found within that little trip to the depths of hell. After getting a ton of negative feedback over the first couple of weeks, GGG relented and allowed tier 17 maps to be modifiable with Chaos Orbs only. They also made tier 17 maps have both tier 17 and tier 16 modifiers. This meant the insanely lethal tier 17 modifiers were less frequent, but not really any less lethal. At the same time, they also made tier 17 map modifiers grant large bonuses to 1 of 5 stats chosen randomly, and these stats are pack size, item rarity, more maps, more currency, and more scarabs. These are also increased by back to basics for even more reward. I've had maps where I had 600% more currency, and, also with tier 17 modifiers being involved, a lot more danger. As a result, you might need to chaos spam a tier 17 map 10 to 20 times to get a playable map, and potentially dozens more times to get a playable map that also grants the rewards you want, which would usually be more currency or more scarabs. The gameplay loop is not super well liked throughout the community, and it betrays a fundamental issue with tier 17s that I've had a suspicion about since they were first announced: the unmodifiability. Why were they put out like that? I admit I'm just speculating here, so I could definitely be wrong, but this feels like a late design decision, something that was added on after the concept was first put together, not an idea that was core to their design from the onset. Transitioning from being unmodifiable to chaos spammable feels like the kind of halfway compromise that nobody's really happy with. My tinfoil hat theory is that in the initial design, they were just regular tier 17 maps. You could roll them just like tier 16 maps. And then they realized that players were absolutely going to boss rush unrolled tier 17 maps to speed farm Uber boss fragments. I know I would have been doing that. So in order to prevent that and to make players actually want to clear out the maps, they put in difficult mods with large amounts of quantity, rarity, and pack size, and gave the maps a lot of monsters to kill. The problem is that no reward really matters if you cannot complete the challenge required to get it. If someone offered you $100 million to win a boxing match against a city bus, all the money in the world still wouldn't make you capable of doing it. The bus is going to win every time. When players weren't running tier 17 maps due to a combination of awful mods, unmodifiability, and the Lantern of Aramor adding a thick spread of death-flavored icing over the top, they overcorrected by making tier 17 maps drop a massively increased amount of maps, currency, and scarabs. This, combined with the enormous amount of chaos being consumed rolling those maps, blew a hole in the economy the size of a heavyweight champion city bus. Scarabs that in previous leagues would have been 15 or 20 chaos each are now 1 chaos each in bulk. And on that note, GGG comprehensively redesigned Scarabs. They're cool, they completely transform the endgame, and they kind of handcuffed farming strategies in a big bad way. We know from a lot of the pre-league discussion that Octavian was the main guy responsible for that Scarab rework, so let me just start by saying I like Octavian. For the uninitiated, he is a former PoE streamer and YouTuber turned GGG developer. He's living the dream, and he seems like a good dude. Okay, so the idea with the change to Scarabs was to accomplish two things. One, eliminate the annoying map-to-map shuffle of checking and reapplying your sextants, which clogged up stash tabs and were just a thing that slowed everything down and were very irritating to trade for with other players and annoying to roll up as well. So on that front, mission accomplished. Absolute masterclass on the pitch, no notes. The second goal was to shake up the endgame and allow for more interesting combinations of Scarabs and more avenues for endgame play. And to that, I have to say, mixed results. On the one hand, there has absolutely been a lot of new in-game farming strategies that have arisen from the Scarab change. This has been a real boom time for a guy like me who just wants to try new stuff and compare and contrast. But on the other hand, condensing from 4 Scarabs and 4 Sextants down to 4 Scarabs only really reduces your flexibility. That gets smashed even further by the ability to have multiple of most Scarabs that add content. Because of that design decision, your best bet is virtually always to run vertical farming strategies. That is to say, you do one thing, you do it as hard as you possibly can. Scarabs have multiplicative effects with each other, so going ham is the way. In the past, most profitable strategies were somewhat horizontal. You do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it all comes together to be rewarding, but now, putting half of your eggs in one basket and half of your eggs in another basket is a strategy for coming out with substantially fewer eggs. This is not necessarily a bad thing in the grand scheme, but it does mean that farming feels much more one note, and that wears players down a lot faster, makes them lose interest in the league a lot faster. You get bored more quickly when you're farming 6 super juiced legions per map than you do when you're farming Legion and Strongbox and Harbinger all at the same time. I love Diet Dr. Pepper, but I do like to mix in some Diet Cokes every now and then too. Having that change of pace makes the Diet Dr. Pepper taste better when you come back to it. Variety is the spice of life, and that's true even in Rayclast. Then finally, another contributing factor to Necropolis League really falling off toward the end of the league is that Elden Ring's DLC came out. Because of that, I think at least because of that, you could argue that maybe it's because of them working on Path of Exile too, but in either case, GGG also pushed back the next league release by about a month. Previously, it would have been slated to land right around the time that Elden Ring's DLC was coming out, and obviously they didn't want that overlap. That would be bad for players. That would also be bad for them. They do play Elden Ring, so I'm sure that they actually do want to play it instead of finishing that crunch. So giving themselves another month was, good for us players who like to play both of those two games, but maybe not great for the health of the league itself. As soon as you hear it's going to be a longer league, ironically, it means that your actions have more lasting impact, but generally for players, they go, oh god, this league's gonna last forever, I think I'll peace out now. I have a lot more to say about Elden Ring, but I'm not gonna upset anybody by spoiling anything, so I'll just say it's very good. Actually, no, I will say that it is very hard, which is what I wanted. I do not think it is too hard. I think it is exactly as hard as I wanted it to be, which is bone crushing, but in a good way. All right, we'll close on what my hopes are for patch 3.25. First off, I would like to see tier 17 map modifiers be made significantly less oppressive. I don't think Uber bosses really need to be tweaked. I think tier 17 maps have just been too nasty, and Uber bosses are actually completely fine where they are. Okay, item number 2. I do not want a crafting league. Please no crafting league. No inventory management, please. Just farm league. Give me money, money now, me a money needing a lot now. No crafting, just currency, please. No league mechanic on the tree. Please, never again. They tried the experiment. I'm glad that they tried it. They got it out of their system. Never again with the league mechanic on the tree. Just let us do regular league mechanic where it is just in the league and that is it. And we don't have to spend Atlas passive points buying back the league mechanic from the Atlas passive tree. And finally, further development of the Scarab rework. I don't know that capping the number of scarabs of a given type is a great idea, but it is certainly a possibility. I do think it would be nice to have more competitive potential for horizontal strategies with vertical ones. I think that capping them would fix the issue of every farm strategy being extremely vertical, extremely one note, but it would also really serve as an artificial limitation on player freedom, and that is very much something that does not jive with GGG's typical approach to design. I would love to see more interaction between league mechanics and their scarabs, but that feels like a tall order for a league that's coming in when GGG is definitely under a pretty significant crunch trying to get PoE2 ready for early access later this year, so I have real doubts about them doing something super big with scarabs again. But maybe they will. The Scarab Redesign this league was huge, and I do think it successfully fixed one of the biggest problems with PoE as a game for me, which was sextants. The two biggest successes of Necropolis League were All Flame Embers and Lantern of Aramor, devoted mods that would make the strongest monster drop a bunch of a specific currency. Being able to force special types of monster packs onto maps is just really good and cool. This could probably just stick around, and I would imagine it would take the form of like a Scarab or something, but I would like to see the All Flame Embers stick around. The second part, the Lantern of Aramor devoted modifiers that make the strongest monster drop a bunch of a specific currency. Wow, that's a mouthful. That is really, really good. Making the strongest monster drop things rather than all of the monsters drop things helps so much with wrist strain, it helps with visual clutter, and it's just immensely preferable for me. I would much rather pick up 20 Chaos Orbs from one dude in a single, neat, tidy pile than run around a map picking up 25 individual Chaos Orbs that all drop separately. Alright, in conclusion, I think that the base game is in great shape right now. Arguably, it's in better shape than it has been in a long time. It's definitely not perfect, but I think most of the reasons why Necropolis League has struggled to keep players engaged are issues with the league mechanic and just the timing of it being a first quarter league release, which is as inevitable as the tides. I do expect that the next league will be better, if only because I don't think they're going to throw multiple stash clutter leagues at us in a row. Alright, I know this was kind of a long video and there's definitely more stuff I wanted to cover and left out because I thought it should probably be under half an hour. But just to give the final recap, Crafting League, bad clutter, corpses, 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 League too long, tier 17's way too hard, Elden Ring, Scarab Redesign, Elden Ring. But don't worry, the future is bright, and I'm still enjoying the league. I'm still going to play it all the way down to the bitter end. I am definitely looking forward to the next league and to PoE2, of course, and I think those are both going to be pretty fun and pretty exciting. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.